Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. We've got a lot of things that we're going to cover tonight, but we're not covering that many topics. Some of you may have heard the Queen may or may not have passed away. It seems like she has in some days, but because of that, all business of government has largely stopped. And so what that means is that there haven't been that many developments going on in regards to Alberta politics. But as is to be expected with Alberta politics, there's still plenty of stuff going on. We're also going to be doing a bit of a roundup on the entire Danielle Smith GoFundMe goat show, because it is really quite complicated. And there's so many moving different pieces with it that we wanted to put it all in one place where, at least up until today's date, we feel like we cover everything. So that's what we're going to be doing tonight. But to start with, obviously, one of the biggest stories of the week has to do with the Alberta Human Rights Commissioner. Back in July, when he was first appointed. Now, it's important to highlight. There's a couple of things that there's a little bit of nuance here that's probably important, which is in no way to diminish the problems. Back in July, a gentleman who was named is named Colin May was appointed to be the new chair of the Alberta Human Rights Commission. It's worth noting he'd been on the commission for 3 years prior to that, and it wasn't until he was named the chair that some things started to come up. In particular, the biggest detail that caused the most problems had to do with the fact that he had done a book review for a book that in many ways some people felt was quite Islamophobic. Coupled with that, though, his review was actually pretty Islamophobic. We want to highlight a couple of the pertinent sections for you here that really had to do with it. So the review came out of the C2C Journal, and it was back in 2009. The book that he was reviewing was called Islamic Imperialism, A History by Ephraim Karsh. And like I said, it was published in June in 2009. There's two quotes that are really the crux of a lot of the controversy. In the article, May's review included the statement, "Islam is not a peaceful religion misused by radicals. Rather, it is one of the most militaristic religions known to man, and it is precisely this militaristic heritage that informs the actions of radicals throughout the Muslim world." Now, it got even more complicated because some people have said, oh, no, that was him paraphrasing what the book was trying to say. He did have some sections where he definitely seems to have inserted his own opinion. At one point, after the author of the book had suggested that, you know what, maybe if Muslims just did a thing where they kept, they practiced their religion for themselves, they didn't have the I'm going to use the word evangelical because there are some parallels, approach that he highlighted in his book. What Colin May had to say was, Karsh seems to endorse an odd solution for Islam. In the epilogue for the book, he briefly makes the point that Muslims must do is accept that their religion be understood as a private faith. Given all that has come before, it seems a strange and somewhat unlikely conclusion. If Islam is inherently imperial, and if many of the problems of analyzed that imperialism derive from a doctrine that artificially separates religion from politics, not to mention the disastrous effects it is producing through radical Islamic movements, then it is not a bit strange and utopian to cancel that separation. Now, when all of this came to light, there were a lot of people who were alarmed. It really started to get publicity in the middle of July. And one of the groups that was most vocal was the National Council of Canadian Muslims. They issued a statement at the time saying that they were deeply, deeply concerned, but they had also heard that May had committed to meeting with Muslim communities and Muslim leaders and learning and reflecting. Unfortunately, we get to this week. So on September 12th, the NCCM, or the National Council of Canadian Muslims, released a statement that not only had May not met with the Muslim leaders he'd rejected proposed meeting dates with no alternatives evidently presented as per the NCCM statement. He was also allegedly writing letters threatening lawsuits against, air quotes, his critics. This prompted the MCCM to issue a public statement that they and over 24, there were 28 in total, Muslim organizations sent a letter to Justice Minister Tyler Shandro to fire May. Shandro, in turn, asked for May's resignation. But as with all things in Alberta, that wasn't the end of it. So it came out shortly after that May had actually hired a lawyer. And the lawyer said, you know what, we heard, I'm paraphrasing heavily here, by the way, but the lawyer said, you know what, we heard that they want Colin to resign. He's not going to do that. He's not going to resign. He's going to be staying on. Thank you for your opinion, I guess. Well, from there, Tyler Shandro actually issued a ministerial order, an order in council, where he said, yeah, I'm just going to revoke the position. And it seems like a lot of this has to do with, well, there was a contract that was signed. There's this problematic guy who got signed the contract. But it's important to highlight, again, those articles were published in 2009. It's not new news. Anybody who did any kind of background on this gentleman would know that, yeah, this is the thing. Well, after Shandro revoked his position, his lawyer came back and said, you know what? We're going to be taking you guys to court. We're going to be taking legal action against the government. The lawyer claims that May did meet with community groups and individuals and accused the NCCM of cutting the process short. Now, obviously, given the fact that the lawyer has said, hey, you know what, we're going to be taking this to court, this is just still the early phases of it. But at the end of the day, it's really just all a tremendous shit show. So that is for everybody who's been trying to figure out what's been going on with the Human Rights Commission's chair, what's been happening there. That's the Coles Notes of it. But the big thing that we're going to be talking about tonight, before we get to the open forum part of the show, has to do with Danielle Smith and her COVID GoFundMe. This has been going on for the better part of 3 months. And there's a lot of moving pieces, and there's been a lot of conflicting information and statements. So what we're going to try to do tonight is go through all of the publicly available stuff in order to try to make sense of it. And then at the end of it, we've got some questions that we really think that Danielle Smith would probably do well to provide some answers to, given some of the confusion. So the Coles Notes of it are, in September of 2021, Danielle Smith started a GoFundMe. She did this for 2 reasons that she identified on her GoFundMe page. The first was to increase the availability of Johnson & Johnson vaccine. She believed that people should have more choice. And at that time, in September of 2021, those vaccines weren't copiously available. The other thing that she wanted to do was start a court challenge in order to sue the government, ostensibly, to allow doctors to treat patients using a variety of different treatments, let's go with. Even though I have a hard time calling them treatments, because yes, in some of the supporting materials that you referred to, of course, we do go back to hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. So non-evidence-based medicine. There had been some anecdotal stories of some physicians who had said, well, I really want to treat with these things because I think it might be worth a try, but, the college and all of the evidence and all of the medical rules and all of the systems that are designed to keep patients safe say no. And so this became a big story that Danielle Smith chased in a variety of venues. And then she started this GoFundMe, ostensibly, to raise the money to fight the power, I guess. That GoFundMe raised $101,425, so over $100,000. And it was in a very short period of time. On September 21st, Danielle Smith issued a statement and an update in the GoFundMe saying that she was told by the lawyers that courts can't fix supply chain issues. And she said the lawsuit was now going to be focused on allowing doctors to treat patients, again, using those less than evidence-based medicine approaches. On October 7th, she issued another update through the GoFundMe. And there she claimed that her GoFundMe campaign had already influenced the availability of vaccines because some provinces were starting to get shipments and ordering shipments. And she claimed this despite having acknowledged in the earlier update that it was a supply chain issue. It's really quite skeptical that any of the people involved in the vaccine procurement were driven to move faster because of Danielle Smith's GoFundMe, but that's the claim that she made. Also, on October 7th, Smith included in that update that she'd arranged for $10,000 of the GoFundMe to be moved to a retainer for a lawsuit supporting, again, doctors who wanted to apparently practice non-evidence-based medicine. That retainer was paid to the firm of WKA, who, interestingly enough, now are just WA. It looks like the K is a wall. But this is where, again, things get complicated and messy because two of the lawyers who are affiliated with WKA, and in fact, one of the partners, the A in the WA now, is Rob Anderson. And there's another lawyer who works at the firm named Derek Fromm, or Derek Fromm. I think it's Fromm. I apologize if I'm getting that wrong. Rob Anderson is a name that you might find a little bit familiar. Now, not only are these the guys who wrote, two of the guys that wrote the Free Alberta Strategy, and by extension of that, these are the two that came up with the Alberta Sovereignty Act. But Rob goes back a little bit farther in Alberta politics. You might remember when Danielle Smith crossed the floor. Well, it turns out Rob Anderson is the ex-PC, ex-Wild Rose, ex-PC MLA who joined Smith's Wild Rose before floor crossing with her back to the PCs. He's also her campaign chair. And again, he's the author, one of the authors of the Free Alberta Strategy and the Alberta Sovereignty Act, even though it apparently hasn't been written, so there's questions to be asked here. And this is the act that legal and constitutional scholars, other leadership contestants in the UCP race, and really anyone with a basic understanding of civics have all said is completely ridiculous, it's largely illegal, it's unconstitutional, and it's a massive step towards separatism. So that's a little bit of Rob's resume. Moving on from there, though, we have more updates from the GoFundMe. On October 10th, Smith updated again saying that she was keeping the fundraiser open despite hitting the $100,000 target in case there was a judgment of costs in her yet-to-materialize lawsuit. She went on to say that because of supply issues with Johnson & Johnson vaccines, she was going to ask the government to delay the implementation of any health measures until everybody who could get Johnson & Johnson, everybody who wanted Johnson & Johnson, could get it. Now, we couldn't find any public record of any of that happening. Certainly, the health measures, there's no record of the health measures being delayed because Danielle Smith on her GoFundMe said, we're going to make the government do this. And again, so far in this story, we haven't been able to find any records of any sort of legal actions that have been taken. Not to say they aren't there, just to say that we haven't found them yet. On October 11th, she announced that because many of the drugs that she was advocating for could only be considered using the kind they could only be really used under controlled clinical trials. So Smith, the media personality, announced that she was in the process of investigating how to get people enrolled in clinical trials. On November 13th, she announced that she was now looking at suing the College of Physicians and Surgeons, who she since said in her leadership campaign she's going to completely disband. And she doubled down on creating now a clinical trial so that if people wanted to get non-evidence-based treatment, they could get it through the clinical trial. Except that's not how clinical trials work. Clinical trials are often notoriously difficult for people to get into. So just creating a clinical trial doesn't mean that you get to throw open all the doors and say, hey, everybody who wants to try some horse paste, come on down. That was the last of the updates on the GoFundMe until July. So again, November 2021 until July 2022, there were no further updates on the GoFundMe. Now, on July 13th, somebody who had been paying attention sent us a DM and were like, hey, you guys should probably take a look at this GoFundMe thing because it looks kind of hinky. And we did. And we put up a thread documenting what had happened in the GoFundMe. And we tagged Danielle Smith on Twitter. And we said, hey, could you maybe help us understand what's going on here? Because it seems a little strange. Danielle Smith's response was to immediately block us, not just on Twitter, but on all social media platforms that the breakdown's on. Not a great step in towards transparency. But a lot of that got a lot of attention on July 13th. Fortunately, on July 14th, Danielle Smith was scheduled to appear on Real Talk with Ryan Jesperson. Here's a clip from that.
A lot of people, I think, have been paying attention to this reporting from independent media outlet The Breakdown. You can tell me about this crowdfunding effort you had, raised about $100,000, more than $100,000, for a promised legal fight. You wanted to see the Canadian government forced to make this Janssen vaccine available to Canadians. At the time, you wanted early outpatient treatment available for those who developed COVID-19 symptoms. Raised over $100,000. I know $10,000 of that went to, I think it was a law firm, right? That your campaign chair, Rob Anderson, is involved with. People want to know where the rest of the money went.
Yeah, so I've just been talking with the lawyers, because part of the issue we face, we did do a number of interviews with a number of doctors to see if some of them would come forward and take on the challenge. And unfortunately, they're terrified of the government. Frankly, they're afraid that the government is that the College of Physicians and Surgeons, once they get a black mark on their file, that they're going to not be able to do their work in the rest anywhere in the world. So I've been in touch with the JCCF, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedom. They've got two ongoing pieces of litigation, and so we're just going to piggyback on that. Where the one of them is to protect the rights of doctors to have the right to treat and the right to offer medical exemptions. So we're just going to piggyback on some of the lawsuits that are already going on rather than have our own separate one.
Did any of the funds raised from that crowdfunding effort go toward funding your leadership campaign?
I was going through WKA lawyers. I mean, no, and so yes, $30,000 went to WKA lawyers.
Okay, so $30,000 from the crowdfunding went to fund your leadership campaign. No, that's what I'm asking. It's a question.
No. $30,000 went to WKA lawyers, because we were doing, as I mentioned, the pre-work of just trying to vet the different doctors to try to find a candidate who would be able to help us. And then we ultimately are going to be working with JCCF to support their effort.
Okay, so to be clear, no funds raised from that crowdfunding effort are involved in the $175,000, whatever it is that you just ponied up and paid the other day. You know, I have to ask, right? People want me to ask the question.
So there's a lot to unpack in that little clip there. First of all, it seems like Danielle Smith is really, really good at asking questions, but maybe not so great at answering them. And that certainly remains on brand with what this whole little tale shapes out to be. But there's some other things that are important to take out of that clip. So first of all, in that clip, Smith was very clear. The amount of money that went to the lawyers was not $10,000. It had increased to $30,000. So apparently there was $30,000 that was in the retainer account. She also was very, very clear that she had just been talking with the lawyers. But again, this is where things start to get a little bit confusing. That same day, she posted an update to her GoFundMe site that clearly stated, that they had conducted interviews with physicians searching for a physician to go on the record before the courts advocating for treating patients with non-evidence-based treatments. They weren't able to find any willing to do so. Weird, right? Smith also included in that update that she asked her lawyer, Mr. Frome, and this part's important, before the UCP leadership what to do with the GoFundMe, and he suggested putting the retainer accounts towards the JCCF, who astonishingly, and this is important for later, are a registered charity. Now, right out of the gates here, we have some inconsistencies that kind of force some questions. So Smith, in the Jesperson clip, she had said she had just been talking to her lawyers. On the GoFundMe update, she said that before she even entered the UCP leadership race, she had the conversation with how to make what are we going to do with the money? Well, Smith announced her leadership bid on May 19th, 2022, 2 months before she announced that the retainer account would be donated to the JCCF. Now, this is also bearing in mind that there hadn't been an update on the GoFundMe from since November the previous year. So Smith's made some pretty big decisions about what to do with the scope of what the money was raised for, and she didn't update anything until she was pressed on camera on a live interview. And then all of a sudden it became really important to update, even though that update to some degree created some conflict with what she had said in the interview. But of course, as always, there's still more. Let's remember that in the conversation with Jesperson, Smith was clear. $30,000, retainer account, lawyers. Well, the obvious question then becomes, where did the other $71,425 go? That's a lot of money. And simply saying we're going to donate some of the retainer, as she appears to have done in that interview and in that GoFundMe update, we're going to donate the retainer, doesn't make that $71,425,000 going away. Now, we just released an episode on September 17th, Saturday. It's a gooder. It's a little bit of a challenge to listen to because we spoke with the founder of the fairly right-wing independent media outlet, the National Telegraph. And this gentleman's name is Wyatt Claypool. And he's been doing his own digging. And he provided us with a text message that he received in the course of doing his digging. That text message came from somebody extremely close to Smith, and that we're definitely not stating as a lawyer, and we're definitely not stating that is a partner with a law firm that Smith used for a lawsuit that never happened. We're not stating any of those things, to be clear. Claimed that an unidentified amount of the money went to the JCCF. Some went to the cost of the lawsuit that never happened and kept changing its targets. And some was actually kept in a retainer for Smith to use at her discretion down the road. So first the retainer had $10,000, then it had $30,000, then it was being donated by at least 2 different places where Smith said, oh no, we're donating the retainer. And then all of a sudden now there's this other retainer that Smith is apparently holding on to for, it's up to her, I guess. The text also went on to say that the only way Smith would account for how over $100,000 was spent, or apparently saved in a retainer account, was if a news outlet claimed she hadn't donated the money and she sued them. Wyatt did also share with us that he asked the JCCF if they would confirm that they received a donation, and he asked if they would confirm what the amount was. And the JCCF said, first the JCCF said, where are these social media posts where Smith says that she donated this money? And then they said, we don't release any information about our donors or the amounts that they donate. Let's be absolutely clear, though. We're not saying whether or not Smith donated any money to the JCCF. We're not saying that. We don't want to be sued. But we do have a few questions that we think it's probably important for Danielle Smith to maybe think about answering. Maybe there's a few points that she could perhaps clarify for people who have been following this story. The first question that we have is, how does Smith reconcile that she asked Albertans to donate it to a cause, in this case a lawsuit, and that lawsuit never happened? The second question that we have is, shouldn't someone who is condemning public institutions for a lack of transparency, going so far as to accuse healthcare for being misleading? She accused AHS of sabotaging the COVID response. Shouldn't somebody who's doing all of those things and wielding all of that righteous indignation be committed to being transparent for how this money was spent? We'd also like to know if there's nothing for people to be alarmed by. Why is she refusing to provide proper detailed documentation for how it was spent? Now, we totally acknowledge she doesn't have any legal obligation to detail how the money was spent. Once people gave her the money in GoFundMe, it's her money. But if you're going to be in a public role, if you're going to be fundraising publicly for social causes, and if you're then going to run to be the premier of a province, it might be worth providing a little bit of detail on that. We'd like to know what she's hiding, if she is hiding anything. We're not saying she's hiding anything. We're just saying there's some inconsistencies, and those inconsistencies kind of force a little bit of curiosity. We'd like to know how she reconciles her implication that she was donating the retainer when it appears that a retainer was actually kept for her use down the road for whatever she wants it used for. Why is the GoFundMe still open? If you go to the GoFundMe page right now, there haven't been, from what we can see, now GoFundMe does allow for anonymous and invisible donors, but from what we can see, we went so far as to click in to give another donation, and by all outward appearances, we didn't give a donation, but by all outward appearances, you can still give a donation to that GoFundMe that's still up and running. If she shut everything down months ago, because again, remember she said this happened before she entered the leadership race, which was back in May. Why is this GoFundMe still up and running? How does Smith reconcile these actions with what she believes Albertans expect of a premier, especially after all of the things that Albertans had to deal with Jason Kenney? It is already starting to look like Danielle Smith is potentially, even just by not disclosing any of this stuff, is potentially demonstrating the same kind of entitlement that we saw with Redford. The same lack of transparency. The same I'm above it all that we saw with Redford and that we saw with Kenney on the roof of the Sky Palace. The last question that we have that we'd really like to know an answer to, because this one gets really important and really relevant really quick to whether or not anyone had any kind of personal gain from this whole situation, is given that the JCCF, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, is a registered charity. Who, if anyone, benefited from a tax donation that would potentially have converted from a huge public donations to a private individual into a tax write-off for a person or a company? Because the JCCF is a charitable organization. If Danielle Smith gave $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, heck, let's go to the full $100,000. She could have potentially gotten a tax receipt for that, for money that she raised from a GoFundMe that was given to her by people who believed she was going to be executing, I don't know, a variety of lawsuits. This is all public information. This is all readily available, with the exception of the text that we were provided by Wyatt Claypool from the National Telegraph. Everything else is public. It's out there. You can go to the GoFundMe right now and you can see all of the same things that we're looking at. You can go and watch the Ryan Jesperson episode where she was speaking on there. We have, and other people have, asked repeatedly if Danielle Smith, who's running to be the Premier of Alberta, would be willing to show a little bit of, I don't know, adult transparency, a little bit of accountability, a little bit of responsibility. She's claiming that she's going to be throwing around hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars with some of the programs that she's thinking about implementing. But she can't either seem to or want to provide the appropriate accounting of what happened with this $100,000. It would be great if some other UCP leadership candidates decided to maybe hold her feet to the fire a little bit with this. But one of the things that we're starting to see already in this UCP leadership race is it appears that some people are already trying to smooth the waters over a little bit because they want to make sure that they're going to get their nomination or they're going to get their cabinet position or. Now, that is the end of our main program for tonight. But as always, this is where we're going to have in just a second, Deirdre Mitchell-Smith is going to be joining us. She's got hopefully a federal thing that she can talk about maybe a little bit. And then, as always, we're going to open up the floor to you. If I've said something in any of the first chunk of this broadcast, we're streaming, I can say that now, that you find disagreeable or that you have evidence or information that contradicts, would love to hear it. Because we don't want to be wrong. But again, it's kind of hard to be wrong when you're just asking questions. All of that being said, Deirdre, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing fantastic, but let me be the first. You called me Deirdre Mitchell-Smith.
Oh, did I?
You did.
Oh, man. Women of Amy Polly is just in my head, I guess. Deirdre Mitchell-McLean.
Right.
I apologize. That's entirely my bad.
It was. Okay. So, other than that, it was actually a relatively quiet week federally because they technically aren't back in. They were supposed to reconvene on Monday, which they're not going to because that's the National Day of Mourning. But they were in the House on Thursday and Friday. So there was an Affordability Spending Act that came through that was announced, and it was with regards to the dental plan for children who are 12 and under. It is not really ready to go. So at first it's going to be a reimbursement program. Apparently CRA and, provincial health programs are trying to work together to make it a little more seamless. But that is technically in place for children under 12 and under, sorry. There's going to be 6 months worth of doubling of GST rebates. So that would be the October and January. I was doing the math just before we got on because I think it's October and January that they'll come. But it would be 2. So 2 of them will be included. Like I said, it's temporary for 6 months. And then there's also a rental support program of a one-time payment or one-time supplement that families with less than $35,000 a year income can apply for. It's a one-time $500 assistance with rental. Now, the quiet week obviously was for the Liberals. It was not a super quiet week for the Conservatives with their brand new leader, Pierre Poilievre.
I'm gonna have to limit you to just 2 questions, Deirdre.
Yeah. Quebec MP Elaine Reyes resigned from the Conservative Party caucus to sit as an independent. And in response, the Conservative Party sent a text message campaign to all of the members that were in his riding, suggesting that they contact his constituency office and ask him to resign. Now, the amazing part of this is that when Reyes resigned, he very specifically said that he did not want to compromise his values and convictions because he doesn't support Poilievre as a leader. And of course, the irony is just dripping because this is something that Poilievre has been championing since February. Personal choice, conscience rights, whatever you want to call them. And as soon as someone used them against him, he was all over it. So the Conservative Party of Canada had to issue an apology for doing this. And I mean, of course, that's how it works. And then the last thing that I want to say about federal, obviously, most of the people in here have seen Twitter, have seen their feeds. They have probably seen this I'm an extremist and Trudeau doesn't like me campaign that has been going on.
I saw that. I said some cheeky things.
Yeah. I made a semi-cheeky post that was, it really wasn't fully cheeky. It was just sort of, all right, I can play this too. And it was, I mean, I was accused of co-opting ideas from the right over that. It was an absolute troll beacon for sure.
I gotta say, like, you did this on Twitter, right? Like, did people think that they were on Parler or whatever if you're co-opting ideas from the right?
I don't know. It's just kind of like, I mean, my response, of course, because it's me, and I'm like, hey, good ideas can come from anywhere on the spectrum. Like, why not? But I mean, like, I'm not the only one. I saw some other people that did it as well, and it was so annoying to see these things, because it just, I mean, the majority of people, again, I'm sure, are from Alberta in here. You probably remember the sewer rat campaign, right? After Sarah Hoffman said to, I don't think it was Derek Fildebrandt, but, you know, one of them. And she said, you know, we're worried about hard hats. We're concerned about hard hats, and you're hanging out with sewer rats. And this is why I absolutely have to tip my hat to the right and their communication sometimes, because they turned that into an attack on Albertans in exactly the same way. This is exactly what has been done with this whole, you know, I'm an extremist and Trudeau doesn't like me, or Trudeau thinks that I should leave Canada. I don't know. It was just wild to me.
Well, it's fascinating because
happening in this.
I think one of the things that the right, air quotes as we're speaking, as if such things are monoliths, which we know is like a personal grindstone of mine. But we know one of the things that the right consistently do is, if they're going to go after something, they don't go after with nearly as much veracity. Like, you'll see the left will talk about ideas. The right go after people. And they'll sometimes tie those ideas into the people, like we saw with this campaign, where it was, oh, Justin Trudeau, these policies are Justin Trudeau, and they make that person a symbol of everything that's bad for them, I guess. But the left does that far less, and it's interesting, because the trade-off seems to be, to me, and I'd love to get your take on this, Deirdre, but the trade-off seems to be, when you go to a lot of the right's attacks social media, and I think that it's important to delineate that not all conservatives behave like children, not all progressives behave like children, but some people on both sides do. And when you go to the right's attack social media, it is hyper targeted against Trudeau. It is hyper targeted, like the memes and the pictures and the photoshops and all of the things of Trudeau doing a number of things. That is hyper targeted. If you start to see that on the left, it seems to be that a lot of people on the left go, oh, that's kind of infantile, let's not do that. But on the right, it seems to be like, oh, I'm gonna add that, and I'm gonna put a pig in there somewhere. I don't know why I said that, but it's how much do you think that plays into it?
Well, I think quite a bit, and it's because, you know, people that tend to be more left leaning, more progressive, and people who tend to be more right leaning, more conservative, respond to different things. So, like, this is something that I've definitely noticed over the last few years, is that the Conservative Party of Canada seems to speak extremely well to Albertans.
What's with the
Right?
bases?
Like it's and I mean, of course, we can look at all these people who used to be employed with the government in Alberta and are, and they switch back and forth. We take theirs after they lose or whatever. But it's really surprising to me that they keep doing this, that they keep pulling these people from Alberta and using like what seems to me to be a very Alberta centric campaign nationwide, because no one else has had the propaganda that we've had in Alberta, especially about Trudeau. Like, I don't honestly think that it really does the same thing. I mean, it's starting.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it does the same thing. And so, like I said too, like people who are a little more left leaning, they tend to look at, they tend not to make it necessarily a personal attack. And I'm not saying fully left leaning, because
Oh yeah, no, the personal attacks do exist on both sides. Let's be real clear about that, said the white man with the beard, as I've had pointed out many, many, many times.
And as I do enjoy, it's not necessarily a straight line of a left-right spectrum. It's, well, there's the horseshoe theory, but also it's a complete circle. So your extreme bits, it doesn't matter if they're left or right, they're doing the same thing.
They just want to control everything.
Yeah, exactly. They're all looking to control something. It just, I think I remember hearing the left wants to control the money and the right wants to control your life. So like they're doing the same thing. Their goal is similar. But yeah, like the attacks do not work both ways, so to speak. And like, I think this is just a psychological issue that they have to get a handle on, right? What do people who are willing to be more left leaning, what are they willing to, how much are they willing to take, so to speak? Like, I see quite a few left leaning people who are saying populism works, let's go populist, but you can't do it in the same way.
Well, I don't understand how, like, if you're going to say we're going to have progressive values and lead the charge, how do you get to the lowest common denominator on leading the charge? I don't know what that looks like from a progressive standpoint. Do you think there's also a piece of it? Like, I was thinking, Don Braid was throwing a little bit of fire this week as well, and at one point somebody said something crass, and he basically replied, hey, you know what? If I do cover a lot of conservative leadership contests. If you guys had fewer of them, I'd do it less. And there's almost a bit of a branding exercise, I wonder, where you take a look at the figureheads of the left, and for the better part of a decade, the leader has been Rachel Notley. And when you take a look at the figureheads at the federal level, ever since Justin Trudeau showed up and ran for leadership, it's been the Justin Trudeau show. Whereas if you take a look at the revolving door of conservative leaders, both provincially and federally, like, it's pretty busy. I mean, Kenny isn't even going to be finishing a full term as premier. And then I think we've had 6 federal conservative leaders or in the last 20 minutes or something. I don't even know anymore.
Well, and that's exactly it, right? I had this conversation with a few people, and I'm like, I have participated provincially in the Alberta Party leadership race, in the Liberal leadership race, 2018, 2017, respectively. Like, I've participated in all of the leadership races. It just so happens that no one's had nearly as many as the Conservatives in the last, like you said, pretty much decade. So, it's just the way that it is. It's not that we're not attacking the Conservatives specifically because of this, but they're the ones that keep going back to the leadership race.
Yeah, well, and it's but I really do think, like, I think part of the strength in that is, I mean, I think that as a general rule, I know certainly here, we'll make jokes about what people do, we'll make jokes about people's policies,
Mhm.
but we don't say Danielle Smith is a very, very bad person. We say we have some questions because of some inconsistencies, and we'll probably make a few jokes along the way. But there's certain things that you just don't go after. There are certain rules of engagement, and it seems like in a lot of ways there is a greater disposition for the ad hominem attacks and the personal attacks and all of that kind of stuff with some of the more extreme attack dogs on the right.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. And it's like it's problematic in the same way. So many of us looked at, like what the NDP had done since 2019 with it's all Kenny, it's all Kenny, it's all Kenny. And quite a few of us realized, I mean, after they didn't win the 2019 election, okay, you can't make it just about Kenny. That is not, like, that's not resonating with people. And you can see kind of how easily people turned, like people who supported the UCP turned on Kenny.
Yep.
Right. So, I mean, just making it about that one person. And they did start to switch their communications to make it about the party. But again, this is not something that seems to work with people who are left leaning. So with the left leaning, you've got to go with the policy, not the people.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me because, as you pointed out, I almost wonder how much of it is how do people perceive threats in a way. There's, I'm told, a lot of men that are intimidated and threatened by women, especially women getting like any sort of advancement in society. That's a really bad thing because you're going to get like more of my pie, and it's like there's no pie. But it seems like that makes it easier for people to target female, higher profile figures. And I don't know.
That's societal, though.
Well, but I
Like,
almost,
we're
I
still
almost
trying to
wonder,
break
like,
out of that.
when we see the strategies that work for the different curves of the spectrum, I guess, because it is kind of a horseshoe or a circle. But when we see the strategies that work, it's almost a reflection of the segments of society and the values that those groups hold. But what I found, one of the things that I find really interesting is in the episode that we dropped on Saturday, the conversation with Wyatt. The thing that really struck me was I disagree with just about everything that Wyatt believes policy wise. We could not probably be more different from a policy standpoint. He's got some perspectives on issues that even in though that conversation was very clearly we're here to talk about Smith, I had to say, no, let's not go down this rabbit hole today because we're here to talk about this other thing, and I'm going to have to get my soapbox out, and it's going to be a whole thing. But the shared value that the hardcore right-wing conservative has with the left-wing punk rocker is principles matter. And that's why I'm curious. Like, do you think that do you see Danielle Smith answering any of these questions that we asked tonight?
I mean, at some point, well, because she's not legally bound to do so. Why? Why would she even open that up? We saw with Jason Kenney as well, that he would have preferred to ignore a number of things that someone he respected said you can't.
Yeah.
Because he had to walk back quite a few things. And it is possible, although I honestly don't know who Danielle Smith is listening to, I do believe she's still very close to like Preston Manning, who really did have more of a statesman-like persona, put it that way. But I mean, he could have lost it, honestly, because we've seen so many people lose so much of their let's call it let's call it statesmanship. Let's call it a I'm trying to be super diplomatic here.
Dignity.
No, it's not that. It's whatever the nice way of saying grip on reality is.
Okay.
But that's what we've seen happen over the course of the pandemic, right? Is that people that we know, people that even people that we were acquainted with prior to the pandemic, and we have just seen this incredible slide, and I'm quite certain that it's the loss of control. It's the I don't want to deal with something that technically I have absolutely no control over, that can control my life, that can interrupt everything that I understand as being my right or my entitlement or whatever you want to call it. But we've seen this. So, Preston Manning, I know that she's been a big, Smith has been a big participant in Manning Center, like their little mini conferences and stuff, as well as their main conferences. So I'm pretty sure that but I honestly don't know where Preston Manning sits anymore, because he could have absolutely lost it as well.
He said some things
point,
in
he
the last
was
little
quite
while
the statesman.
that certainly lend it to believing that he had, to some degree, has fallen down the same rabbit hole Smith does. And I mean, when we take a look at the people that have clearly been to some degree influencing her policy, cough Alberta Prosperity Project, cough Theo Fleury, cough Kean Baxty, we're not talking about the folks who have the reputations for necessarily being the most, I'll say, hinged.
Oh, okay. That also works.
I just took the prefix away, and I felt like that was getting me where I needed to go.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not sure where he is sitting anymore. So, I mean, does she, like who's whispering in her ear? I don't know who was whispering in Kenny's ear, but they had some sway, right? We saw him walk things back. It honestly depends, and I'm not certain that she has anyone whispering in her ear that's going to say, dude, you can't do that. Like, you just can't, because right now it doesn't seem like anyone is telling her she can't.
It feels like everybody's afraid to, because based on what some of the comments that Wyatt shared in that episode, she has a temper.
Yeah, that does not surprise me.
Allegedly. I want to ask, before we move on, I want to ask, you had a Zoom thing where you talked about the I didn't make it to it, but
I didn't post it, so
well, there you go.
So I made it really difficult for me.
Super exclusive. I don't have the right clothes. But you were talking about the preferential ballot system, and we have some people who are here tonight who have in the past asked, so how does this whole thing work? Any insights that you want to share with anybody tonight?
Yes. So one of the things that Stephen Carter explained really well, and I mean, so you know how the winner gets 50%, over 50%.
Yeah.
And it's over 50% of, like, that number actually kind of changes along the way, because when it's down to only two people, well, then it's 50% of what's left. right? So the 50% number actually changes as they go further. So you want to vote for more people rather than less. And I guess that most people are thinking of their ballot as, well, I'm only going to vote for one person, right? This is the only person I want to be in this race. However, the more people that you actually vote for along the way, then it changes what 50% actually is. So it's kind of the attrition rate, the people who stopped voting after one, the people who stopped voting after two, after three, and also, of course, where those numbers are. Because if your third vote went to someone who was actually knocked off in the first round, well, then now you've only been able to give 2 votes. So the way that he had put it was, number one, the 7th ballot doesn't count. No one ever counts, or they never get to the 7th ballot because somebody has to win before that. And I still did not put Danielle Smith down as the 7th ballot. I do not want to risk that she gets my vote. I as much as Steven said that, I was like, okay, so then it also won't matter if I don't put her on.
There you go.
But yeah, so he sort of explained how keeping the ballots going using your after votes, your after the first ballot, how that actually does tend to benefit probably the person that is least offensive, right? Especially if you got involved, if you bought these memberships because you were like, Danielle Smith should not be our premier, then how do you put that together so that she isn't? And he said, like, one of the things that he started out with was, so often people are like, well, this is obviously, I vote for the one person that I want, and then I make sure that I don't get Danielle Smith. But that's not how it works. You've got to keep those ballots going. Anyway, so the best thing that came out of it was vote for as many people as you possibly can to keep that, that 50% harder to reach. And yeah, you might have to vote for someone you don't necessarily really want either, but it might not be that one person. So
what I'm taking out of this is that in this particular UCP leadership race, the maxim vote early, vote often might well be applicable.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. I mailed mine off actually today. I finished it, I opened it the night that we did the Zoom. I did see what it looked like beforehand. Someone sent me a screenshot of their votes, but I left mine because I knew that I was doing this. I forgot to tell or remind people that I was doing this. And so I filled it out after the conversation with Steven. So.
Okay. Well, are you going to be making that available as a podcast, or is it one for the ether?
I'm going to, I think I have to put it, because it does need to be a video. He made spreadsheets and we had shared screens. So I basically have to try and put it onto YouTube straight from Zoom, because I didn't cast it there at the same time, which I probably should have, because I think you can. So yeah, I'm just hoping that I'm able to do that. And in the end, because apparently my microphone wasn't set up to the actual microphone, so when I muted it and yelled at my children to go ask someone else, apparently that was fully the sound came straight through. So I'm really excited about that.
That will
Really.
that will be that'll make it worth that little Easter egg. That'll make it worth it alone.
I did have someone say that it added a little comedic value to an otherwise really heavy conversation.
Well, there you go. I'm going to take advantage of the timing on this, because I made an absolute commitment that I would not do another 2-hour episode tonight. So unless you've got something specific that you want to make sure that everybody hears, Deirdre, we're coming right up. My clock just turned over to 9 o'clock right now, and that's when I promised I would be off by. Unless there's something specific, I'm gonna plan on next week, maybe allowing for the 2 hours mark if I can negotiate it with the powers that I need to negotiate it with, and we'll just leave the open table for now. How does that work for you? Is there anything else you want to throw in there?
No, I think I covered everything.
Perfect. I'm going to do the clearing the room speech. Deirdre, thank you so much for your thoughts. If anybody was thinking about saying something tonight and was maybe almost on the button there, then please show up next week, and we'll make sure that we have more space there. It's just life stuff happens, you know? So, as always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're producing here at The Breakdown, we would love nothing more than to have you as one of our Patreon sponsors. You can sign up to be one of our supporters at www.patreon.com/TheBreakdownAB, where for the price of just a fancy cup of coffee, or maybe a fancy cookie or muffin, you can help us to continue to produce the kind of content that we do, and as well to pursue some of the things that we like to pursue. We did get an update this week on one of our FOIPs the essay contest. We have a couple of pieces that we're waiting to hear from on that. We should be getting them by the middle of October. It's almost as if it was timed to end right after the leadership race, because of course it was. But those FOIPs do cost a little bit of money, and it's because of our Patreon supporters that we're able to do those things. Patreon supporters also get early access to all of our interview episodes. And we got a couple good ones coming up. We've got a couple special ones coming up for September 30th that I'm really quite excited about. And a little bit nervous about as well. But all of our Patreon supporters get early access to that, and the warm, fuzzy feeling that comes with knowing that you helped us to continue doing what we do. Plus, after October 6th, we're going to need to make a new puppet. Plaster Paris ain't free, folks. So again, you can sign up for that at www.patreon.com/TheBreakdownAB. I want to say big thank you to Deirdre Mitchell Smith McLean for coming on and updating us on the federal situation. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who listened to the live or was watching the live stream on the YouTubes. And if you're listening to the podcast version of this, or if you're watching the video a little bit down the road, if you could leave a little comment, maybe let us know what you thought. Reviews are nice. Ratings also super fun. And yeah, just a big thank you to everyone. Take care of yourselves. It's going to be a bumpy couple of weeks because politics is going to be getting started back up in just a couple of days. And Lord knows there's probably plenty in the chamber. So rest up, take care of yourselves, and please do keep the conversation going.